Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are absolutely thrilled and excited to bring to you the DevOps Practitioner Series. And I'm extremely glad to have Tracy on board today. Tracy Ragan from Deploy Hub. Hi, Tracy, welcome on board.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This is a pleasure.
So Tracy Ragan is also one of the fellow DevOps Institute ambassadors, and it was great to talk with her a few weeks back, and we thought she had something very interesting to offer our viewers. So we will kind of get started with Tracy. Tracy, why don't you give a quick background to our viewers about your journey in the DevOps world and how things have been shaping up?
So I've pretty much been doing DevOps my entire career. Not to go back too far, but I was a mainframe programmer who learned something called Endeavor. Worked on Wall Street, and most people don't know this, but Endeavor is a mainframe version control and deployment tool. It's a CI, probably the first CI server ever written. Not that we don't love Jenkins, but Endeavor stands for Environment for Dev and Ops.
Sure.
It was the
Excellent.
very first tool that really streamlined that process. And then OS2 came along and I jumped ship and soon realized that all of these tight controls and these automation practices we had around the mainframe didn't exist in the distributed platform. And I began a journey in understanding how to build that. And there's done a lot of scripting, a lot of make scripts, and used a lot of different CI tool or version tools like CVS and building things around it to make it look like Endeavor. And that's how we actually built our first product, Meister, company called OpenMake. And from there, about 4 years ago, we saw a shift. And oh, sorry about that.
Sorry.
We saw a shift in how things are being done in terms of the Kubernetes shift coming, and we saw that we needed to pivot, and we started a company called Deploy Hub to do that and to specialize around the microservice configuration management puzzle.
Great. We kind of get into these trends, and one of the things that keeps pop on when I talk with my clients as a business owner for Top is moving towards Kubernetes, right? As a business owner, if I was trying to drive DevOps adoption, why do you think companies will need to move to Kubernetes? What's the whole point? I mean, just give us a bit of background and context in terms of, is this the new big thing or the new fad that's coming across, or it's a hype? What do you think about it?
When I first looked at Docker, I thought there was some hype to it.
Sure.
And I played with it early on, and I actually played with Swarm early on, and I thought this stuff is really complicated. Will companies ever move to it?
Yeah.
And then as it started to mature, I started noticing a change in what I call the bean counters. If you look at a traditional data center and the cost around managing a traditional data center, and the reasons why you would go to the cloud are similar to the reasons why you would go to a containerized environment. So first we decided we wanted to get rid of all the physical servers when we went to the cloud.
Sure.
And the cloud and VM worked for some time, but it still didn't provide the fault tolerance and auto scaling that we have always pursued.
Right.
And something called machine learning and AI hit the market, right?
Yep.
And it created a massive demand for a data center platform that could do that massive auto scaling and be completely fault tolerant and could be controlled and have replication sets and understand, how big we want it to get.
Sure.
And that's what's driving the move to a Kubernetes microservice environment.
Perfect. So what you're saying is that, well, we used to move from, we thought that from the VM world, we will go to the container world. So we've been kind of playing around Docker for a while. So do you think that the containers alone would not be sufficient, that we need to move to Kubernetes? What's the random shift between containers to Kubernetes?
So I think that everybody has to take baby steps in this process.
Sure.
And the first step is to containerize your application.
Sure.
that encapsulates it from having, from having to worry about what version of Windows it's running on or what version of Linux.
Right.
Really makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
But then you start realizing that maybe we need to do something more. Maybe it would be really nice to have an environment that was orchestrated, right? We struggle in the container world. If you try to spin up a lot of containers, you learn that it needs to be managed, and that networking is hard, and data has to persist someplace.
Sure.
And that's where we start getting into understanding why Kubernetes is important. So when you have when you start trying to spin up a lot of containers and start managing it, you have to have something orchestrating it. And every platform you look at, whether it be in an AWS platform or a Google platform or Azure, it's actually Kubernetes on the back end. Even AWS is using a version of it to do that management of those containers.
Right.
So Kubernetes is a way to orchestrate and manage containers.
Sure. No, I think that's a great thing. So what I would suggest is if someone is starting, we'll start with what you have as part of containers. That's a good logical step. But then as you start to kind of scale up your own containers and managing your own containers in your ecosystem of applications, it becomes much more important for orchestration. So it's kind of actually stepping up the game.
And to be able to to control how many pods that you want in a node. Sure. So if you think about it, what a node is simply, if you think about a node as being a physical machine, that's the easiest way to think about it. And Kubernetes allows you to say, I want to have so many pods in that node, and a pod is a collection of containers. Yeah. So it allows us to say, for this application, I want it to grow to this maximum. I want it to auto scale to this maximum spot, and shrink when it's done working. Yeah. And that's the kind of orchestration that Kubernetes does, and that's that auto scaling and fault tolerance that it provides.
Absolutely. And you made a point called fault tolerance, and that's a word that we have been talking about because we do a lot of conversations on site reliability engineering. So that brings to our next question that's most often asked is who is most impacted by a Kubernetes shift? Is it the dev or the ops, and why?
So, I would have to say operation professionals have gotten really good at changing and moving around and evolving on the data center side. Sure. They have done this many times. Many of the folks that I speak to on the operations side, they're kind of tired, and they don't want to do it again. They've just been moving things to the cloud. Now they're being told to move to a whole new environment that's based on the cloud. Yeah. So while they're impacted, they're good at doing it. They really are. They're sharp. They've gone through the networking world. They've gone through just about every shift has impacted them. Sure. Now, on the developer side, that's not the case, to be honest. Me, starting from a mainframe developer, I still understood I had a program. I had to compile it. I went from learning one language to another language. I had to build some automation and some scripts around procedures, but we've adapted, and it's all the same. It's all these shifts has been the same. It's C code or COBOL code or JS. Sure. But when it comes to moving beyond just containerizing your application and moving into microservices, now that's going to really impact and disrupt our world in a pretty big way. Sure. From how we what we call a build to what we call a release, when we have all these independent objects that are loosely coupled, all of it linked at API at runtime. We don't decide what version of the source code we pull out and build it into a binary. Changes a lot. Those two things alone change the way that we think about how we write software. We are all going to become API developers.
I like the word that everybody becomes an API developer, and that's one of the things that SRE is also talking about. We need to look at operation from a software engineering mindset, so which means everybody will have to have the shared kind of the vision of how we kind of work through it. I mean, I like that. So in the software development process, so we moved on from a waterfall to agile. Then we moved now to DevOps, and now DevOps is becoming a mainstream across a lot of the organizations worldwide. It's kind of the mainstream. We know that it has to work like that. So is that software development process really different with Kubernetes? Thinking without Kubernetes and with Kubernetes coming into it, has it changed the whole dimensions in which we have traditionally developed a software development?
So I'm going to probably cause some of your viewers to go.
That's what you
we have
want.
we have never ever achieved. We are still waterfall developers.
Okay. Is it? I'll be kind of amazed when you say
Yeah, yeah. So
that.
this is my theory here, and I'm going to stick to it.
Sure.
When we talk about agile, the whole goal of agile, Kanban, or whatever practice you're approaching, the idea is to take a small snippet of code, right?
Yeah.
Small changes, and push those small changes across.
Yeah.
Incremental. Think incremental,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Incremental. However, our entire CD pipeline, our CI/CD pipeline,
Sure.
is not incremental. When we do if we're trying to work on an incremental basis in terms of coding, we stop at Agile there, and then we do a full monolithic build. We push that across, and we test hopefully only the changes, but generally it goes through a full testing mode. Sure. And then it goes to production, and it still has a waterfall fail, dev, test, and prod. Right. Because what we've never achieved in our traditional Agile practice is truly a 10-minute build. We always rebuild everything, and that has been a habit that I have complained about for I don't know how long. And because we recompile everything, we re-release everything. Yeah. So we've never really achieved a true waterfall approach. Right. Even though developers have been told they have to do things incrementally from a development side. You don't put 15 changes in, you put 2. Yeah.
Sure. I think that's a great point. We have kind of skipped over some of the interim steps, and we said we are doing agile way of working. So I like the way that you actually have kind of compartmentalized in the way of the CI/CD pipeline and say, we're not truly doing agile. We're trying to do a bit of it, but not fully holistic.
Now, microservices forces us to become agile. With microservices, we are truly agile because now we have loosely coupled functions running in production that a collection of those make up our application, what I like to call the logical view of our application.
Sure.
And when we want to make an update, we don't update. A microservice is immutable. Yeah. It's going to run out there until it's deprecated, right? Yeah. So what we're doing now is we're creating a CD pipeline that has not one big monolithic in it. It has many projects, many workflows that are supporting smaller incremental things, functions, microservices, and that is agile. Sure. That is true business agility. That is what we've always tried to achieve. So Kubernetes and microservices is going to give us 3 things. It's going to give us fault tolerance. We have struggled with that for a long time. It's going to give us high scalability required for AI and ML. And it's going to allow us to achieve true agile practices.
Excellent. And you did talk about, and you're also kind of the ambassador and talking about humans of DevOps. Now, with this DevOps transformation, of any transformation, how much of that element of human is being into real practice? And how much of the change that we think that we need to happen from a human of DevOps? How much of involvement do you think that people will make a change in the DevOps CI/CD pipeline?
Let's just talk about the human aspect of it, the cultural aspect, and the struggle that I think that many developers are going to go through. Sure. So if you think about a development team, just the culture of a development team, you have a buildmeister. Yeah. You have everybody coding, and they go home on Friday at 5 o'clock, and the buildmeister sits there and puts it all together and compiles it and makes sure that it can go out. Yeah. That culture is going to change. We still will have somebody now we call a site reliability engineer potentially working on that team. Yeah. But every single person who's writing a function, who's writing a microservice, whether it be one that's shared across the organization or shared within just an application team, sure, is going to become that person that they used to leave on Friday. Yeah. They have to have that understanding of how things are assembled, put together, and be responsible for their particular microservice moving forward. Sure. So that means that a developer has to have a broader understanding of the process.
Sure.
not just their own siloed understanding of it. They have to understand the entire pipeline and what occurs in that pipeline. They can't just go, well, I checked my code in and it worked on my machine, and so you might have something got compiled wrong.
Correct.
It's your problem. It's gonna that culture is going to change, and that, again, like I said, will be, I think that's gonna disrupt our development patterns more than anything, and that's why developers are gonna have more problems with the shift than operations. Now, that being said, developers are generally more excited about it, so
Sure.
they'll have more reason to push for it.
That's great. So the last one on that before we get in is now I have a container. Now what next? How do I kind of move on to the next wave of?
Good question. Good question. So I always tell people, obviously go to the CNCF. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation is where Kubernetes is incubated and is governed. I always tell people start with kubectl. It's a mini version of Kubernetes that you can install on your own machine, and you can play with it. You can start learning about nodes and pods, and you can learn about, replication sets and custom resource definitions and all the stuff that's going to be important to move forward.
Excellent.
And I tell people to go and read this is really adorable book called Fippy Goes to the Zoo. It's a children's book. If you have kids, you can read it to them at night. They'll probably be very tickled over it. But it's about Fippy going to the zoo and learning about Kubernetes, and it's adorably written and cute graphics and pictures, and I suggest doing that.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks a lot, Tracy. I think in the next coming series, probably we would need to do another session on microservices, because I think that's a big wave. Part of it to take it forward on that, So
microservice will be the next piece that people need to really bite down on, because otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah. So thank you so much, Tracy, for sharing your views today about the aspects of Kubernetes and difference between containers, and also the book that people can kind of go there and relish as part of reading novels to do that. Thanks so much for that. And I think that we have a great opportunity here for people to kind of get them entrenched in this time of doing Kubernetes. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
So thanks again, everyone, for being an avid listener for this. Tracy has got a lot to offer us, and probably we will connect with her next time in a series of discussion around microservices. With that, I'm your host, Suresh GP, fellow DOI ambassadors. We spear the humans of DevOps. Thank you again, Tracy.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Bye.